We've got Jon Alexander, who is the co-founder of the New Citizen Project, and author of 2022 Citizen. And Jon's going to tell us more about this, but what I love about this is we talk a lot about problems, but you're going to talk about solutions and how we can all be the solution. So thank you, Jon.
So I'm experiencing some degree of self-hatred right now. I'm quite unsure how I became the 40-something white guy who follows a panel of incredible women. Okay, let's pick that one up. Let's just resolve that by having a quick hands up of who's already downloaded the Young People's Guide to Systems Change. There are multiple hands. If you haven't, get on with it. What I'm going to do, I wrote a book called Citizens. I'm not allowed out of the house without either a copy of the book or this slide. And I'm going to share with you what I want to do today. Actually, is a little bit different to what I sometimes do. I sort of, also in the spirit of following that panel, I realised when I was preparing for this session that I've somehow become an OG climate nature storyteller with 20 years of doing this stuff. I'm like, how did that happen? But I want to share with you, I'm going to start with the key framework of ideas that sits at the heart of all of my work and is an offer of a way of seeing the moment in time we're living in. And then I want to walk through a few projects, a few stories that I've been involved in telling over the years that at the time I was super proud of, each and every one of them, but each one kind of ultimately pushed me on to think, what kind of stories do we really need to be telling and how do we tell them? And what kind of stories actually do we need to build with people rather than tell to them? So I'm going to run through a few quick stories of that, and then I want to share with you like something that's right at the sort of edge of my thinking and learning at the moment, and is quite, I think, a challenge to how we're doing stuff right now. And so it's right at the edge. It's sort of new thinking and learning, and I want to put it out there. It's genuinely something I want to share with you and see what you think of as well, and then close with a couple more stories that reflect, as a result of that, the stories I think we need to be telling and building. So that's your little overview of where we're going. Where I want to leave you is, again, in the same place that we just have got to, like that faith in humanity that came through so powerfully at the end of that panel. Sits right at the depths of my work as well. So let's start with this framework. So this is the set of ideas that I work with. I talk about a shift in the dominant story of the individual in society over the last 100 years or so, from subject to consumer and potentially to citizen. And the idea here is that humans are, my contention is that humans are citizens by nature. We are collaborative, creative, caring creatures. We can and want to make a contribution to make the world a better place, pretty much all of us. But we are also storytelling and story-dwelling creatures. And when we get trapped in the wrong kinds of story, we appeal to them for who we collaborate with, what we care about, what we create, and then we can do some seriously bad stuff. And so across the last century, like at the beginning of the 20th century, we were something like subjects. The right thing to do in the subject story, these are all stories about how to be good, how to contribute. The right thing to do in the subject story is keep your head down, do as you're told, get what you're given. Because there are a God-given few who run society, who know best, they'll lead us to the best outcomes. This is the story of Queen Victoria, right? That story falls apart in the middle of the 20th century. Rise of the Industrial Revolution, rise of the middle class. You just can't sustain this logic that there are a God-given few and then a many who do as they're told in the context of that. And out of the Second World War, through the second half of the 20th century, we built, more or less consciously, more or less deliberately, what I call the consumer story. And in the consumer story, the logic, the way to be good, actually, is to pursue self-interest. Because self-interest will add up to the collective interest. That's how the best society will result. In the consumer story, people are independent, not dependent. It is a shift of liberty and freedom from that. People have stuff done for them, not to them. We have the power to demand and choose, and our organisations and leaders come to serve us instead of only being able to obey and receive and organisations and leaders commanding us. So it was a positive shift in many ways. But what I believe we're living in right now is the collapse of that story. Like, that logic no longer works. You can't solve crises of loneliness and mental ill health from within a story that says we're independent, isolated individuals. You can't solve crises of inequality from within a story that says that everything's a competition and that's the way to make things better. And most fundamentally, you can't solve ecological crises from within a story that says we're separate from nature and that happiness and success is the accumulation of material standards of living. You can't solve the crises from within the story because the story created the crises. Right? And the really deep problem is that too many of the people in positions of power and influence in our society can only, and some of that is us, all right, can only see those two stories. And so they think, right now, they think that they're protecting the consumer story from the subject story. They think we have to make our democracies deliver so that we don't fall into the arms of fascism. What we're doing is pushing people into the arms of fascism when we do that, when we try and deliver for people. The only real way of doing this, the only way out of that fix is to open up and step into a different story. And this is what I call the citizen story. The logic here is the right thing to do isn't keep your head down and do as you're told. It's not just pursue self-interest, it's get involved. Contribute your ideas, energy and resources to the pursuit of the best outcomes for society. And critically, to reinvent our institutions, our organisations, to tap into the collective energy, collective wisdom, collective resource. Because all of us are smarter than any of us. That is how the best society results. That is the only way. So this is the framework that I work with, and what I spend my time doing is challenging organisations and leaders and all this sort of stuff to see people as citizens, not just as consumers, to see young people in particular as citizens, not just as consumers. Because there's a lazy assumption that that's not right. But I want to build through to you, so share with you like some of the stories that come from these different ways of thinking and some of how I'm kind of having to challenge myself and invite you to challenge yourselves as to what kind of stories we need to build and tell. I'm going to gauge the average age of the audience with the next slide. I'm pretty sure you guys aren't going to know what this is, but you might. Anyone recognise this? Hands up, who recognises this? Okay, cool. So this is one of the first things I was involved in my career. I started my work in the advertising industry, an agency called Fallon. And what I want to say with this, so yeah, I was around when Phil Collins was, when someone presented a sketch of a gorilla behind a drum kit and said, I think what we should do to sell dairy milk. So yeah, slightly weird life. But the point here I'm making is that I started my career really believing the consumer story, right? Really believing that if we got organisations to grow, if we put creativity at the service of growth, then that would make society better. Many people are doing this work still with a genuine belief that they're contributing to something good. They're not bad people, right? But they are trapped in a story. I had a massive freaking collapse before I got out of this, but I'm going to get to that. I'm stepping one step ahead. What I then did was I was one of the folks in the advertising industry. I think I saw John Grant in the room, weirdly. Is he here? No, maybe not. There was about 4 of us at this time in the mid-2000s starting to say, how do we use these skills to sell greener stuff? And one of the things I worked on was the shift of Eurostar from Waterloo to St Pancras. Today, carbon neutral journeys begin is the line you'll see there. This for me was the sort of, okay, what if we do green consumption? What if we sell greener stuff? Like that, maybe that's the answer. But what I realized is that that is still trapped in the consumer story. Actually, what we're doing when we tell that story is we're saying to people, your agency is only as an individual. We're starting to say, actually, and I'm going to sow this like little phrase in your brain, and I apologize for it, but I need you to keep hearing it if you get tempted to do this kind of communication. What we're actually saying is, shush, little people, just go shopping. And I'm going to bring that out for you with the example that caused my breakdown. I got the dream brief at one point, at this point, around 2010, I think it was. We got a brief from Unilever, big money brief to get people to look for sustainable palm oil in products. And we developed a campaign that used footage. Does anyone remember the protests at Unilever headquarters around the world where they had orangutans? Yeah? So we developed a campaign that used footage of these protests with the line, "This was our wake-up call, this is yours." So Unilever explicitly acknowledging the role that activism, the role that protest had played, and inviting people to take their agency in some small way. I don't think it's the best in the world, but in some small way. But acknowledging activism, showing that there's a role there. And we put these ads into testing. They came back like everything was amazing. Like people would look for sustainable palm oil. It got their attention. They would think of Unilever differently. They would think of Greenpeace differently. They would see activism as a constructive role in society. Ads got killed, my friends. And this is what was mandated to run. Budget got cut, press ads only. What you buy in the supermarket can change the world. Your face, my love, is a picture. This was brutal, actually, for me. But when you think about how much communication is in the world that basically says this still, says shush little people, just go shopping, says buy this and we will do the rest. Do not do this. Okay? So this threw me out of the advertising industry, threw me into quite a spin, and rebuilt myself with this around. So the question I began to ask basically was, what are we doing to ourselves when we tell ourselves we're consumers constantly? I began to obsess. My first boss in the advertising industry had said to me, the average consumer sees 3,000 commercial messages a day. Your job is to cut through that. You have to make yours the best. First few years of my career, I was like, make mine the best. White guy. And then I was like, 3,000 commercial messages a day? What? And by the way, the latest estimates for some cohorts are anything up to 10,000, right? Like you guys talking about how the dominant story in social media often is consumerism. What I began to ask was that question just as I was doing this work, and that threw me completely. Like we're telling ourselves we're consumers constantly. It's not that people are that, it's that we are surrounded with that story of ourselves. But when we break it, when we create space for something, you heard it, the butterfly on the face, right? Like people want that, they gravitate to it. We want to be invited into our agency, actually, not just sold stuff. And so the founding of the New Citizen Project was going, what if we use those skills to invite people into their agency as citizens, not just to sell even the best possible stuff to them as consumers, but to invite them into their agency as citizens. And we've done some lovely stuff, and it's going really well. And then we had this idea. I came across the fact a few years back, and again, this is a story of frustration that's going to tip me into the edge of my learning now. Came across the fact. Does anyone know this campaign? Yep. Hands up who heard about this campaign. Yeah, that kind of tells the story. So, what we heard, I found out that David Attenborough was going to be doing Wild Isles. Does anyone remember Wild Isles? There we go, right? Hands up who saw any of Wild Isles. Yeah. Okay. So we found out David was going to be doing Wild Isles, and I said to the people behind it, like, when he did Blue Planet, like there was this huge potential political energy created. People wanted to do stuff, but we were in the consumer story, so all that was offered to them was straws. So we said, what if we could use this moment in Britain and we could get the nature conservation organisations together and we could make them host a process to crowdsource what the people of this country want for British nature. Not stand in front of people and ask people to do something, to one small action or sign a petition, but hold the space for things to come together. And we kind of did it, but as this was kicking off, Liz Truss, I was going to say was elected, clearly not, became Prime Minister, shall we say. And she, and the nature conservation organisations, I'm being pretty brutal here, but I'm just going to, this is the truth of what happened, and I'm not, they launched a petition against her. And frankly, they got a buzz of, I would argue, they got a buzz of sugar rush that they thought they had been part of beating her. And a bunch of the attention and the budget and everything that was going into People's Plan for Nature was diverted into a new petition on the day of the first episode of Wild Isles, which was going to be the day that the People's Plan for Nature launched with all of the Attenborough attention, went into a petition called Save Our Wild Isles. Get behind us, not we're behind you. Yeah? So with that, I want to share the model that I've been oh, blimey, here we go. Clearly shouldn't have said that. It's like a helicopter comes in. What's he going to say next? Yeah. So this is, I've started working with, I've been trying to understand why we're so trapped. And I've started working with a model from therapy. It's called the drama triangle. Anyone come across the drama triangle? Yeah. So this is the drama triangle. So the argument here, this is a map of what happens when relationships of any kind enter a destructive pattern. And it can start anywhere. So the idea is it can start with someone becoming a perpetrator, overstepping their agency, taking too much space. It can start with someone becoming a victim, abdicating their agency, and being comfortable in their kind of liking at some level the excuse of their own powerlessness. Or it can start with someone becoming rescuer. I will help. I will do it for you. Get behind me. And once a relationship enters this pattern, it's very difficult to get out. And what happens is that tends to happen as we move around. So put this into climate space, right? Like we have perpetrators who are politicians, arguably. Like we will fix it. Back us to go to COP and we will sort it for you. You have rescuers. Often are NGOs, often journalism, like this sort of, the story that points actually all of the agency into the perpetrator space, I would argue. And who's left out? Citizens, communities, us, really. And then if we start to settle into that and start to accept that role, then politicians start to see us as perpetrators because we get angrier and things start to get really ugly. And you're in that cycle. Now, the joy of this model, the powerful thing is there's an argument for how things change. And the idea is that at each pole, and the really important thing about this, sorry, just to go back quickly because there's something I need to say. The really important thing about the therapy work on this is they say everyone is guilty. Everyone is guilty. And no one is to blame. And we can break this pattern at any point, right? So here's the work that has to be done at any point. So victims need to become creators. They need to step into and claim their own agency. Rescuers need to build the self-reliance of those folks, not step into the space and do it for them. Become supporters, not rescuers. And perpetrators need to cede some control, mark the boundaries, be clear about what they can and cannot do, and create space for the agency of others. And this, I've flipped the triangle, the sort of model I'm working with at the moment, the idea that what we actually can be in and the stories we need to tell, actually, because it is happening, it's just that it doesn't get our attention because we tend to try and tell stories from rescuer space. But the things that are happening have a model which says it's actually creative citizens at the top. Citizens and communities are the heroes, and enabling government and supporting organisations. This is a sort of the model I'm kind of playing with. I'm writing an essay called The Politics of the Drama Triangle, which is kind of fun. And I want to tell you, just give you a few examples of where I see this and conclude with one of my favourite organisations and campaigns at the moment, or I'd almost call them an organising. But this is the model. This is making sense. Cool. So the three, I want to give you three quick fire things, stories from around the world where this is kind of happening and kind of getting exciting or has happened. First up, Wales. Any Welsh folks in the house? Yes. Hopefully you were sort of grinning to yourself a little bit when we were talking about the education system before. Those of you who don't know, this lady is a woman called Jane Davidson. She was a minister in Wales who was heavily involved in the creation of the Future Generations Commission, the Commissioner for Future Generations. And my favourite thing about that, so it holds every policy that comes out of the Senate to account for its impact on future generations and can challenge policy and influence it. My favourite thing about it is that they also changed the job description of the Auditor General of Wales, boring, to mean that the auditor has to hold those policies and assess them against the impact on future generations, not just money. My friend Indy Johar calls it the boring revolution. But what that has done, among other things, the creation of that came from the creation of a national conversation called The Wales We Want, which Jane and others put themselves behind and held the space for, rather than standing in front of and saying, get behind me. So it can happen. And what that's done, one of the key outputs of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is it's meant that the Welsh National Curriculum now explicitly says the aim of this curriculum is to create global citizens. Climate and nature is a huge part of that curriculum. One example. So something that has really powerfully happened. There's now an EU Commissioner for Future Generations in the discussion, in the forming, and like this idea is kind of taking hold. Second one, this group was a citizens' assembly, 60 randomly selected Norwegians. I'm going to have to hurry this story, but I'll give you the very quick version. When the tanks rolled over the border from Russia into Ukraine, the 7 civil society organisations in Norway went, our sovereign wealth fund, which is oil-based, is about to go through the roof. How do we change the story and try and change the way the sovereign wealth fund is spent and invested to acknowledge the power that we have been given by the world getting worse? Instead of petitions and campaigns, they decided that from outside of government, they were going to, apparently they'd seen People's Plan for Nature and that, whatever, they decided they were going to convene a citizens' assembly and get behind whatever the citizens got to. And what they got to has been super profound. Like the sentence that I read from an 18-year-old, who was one of these randomly selected citizens, was Norway's wealth needs to be spent on championing the prosperity of the world, not the prosperity of Norway. An 18-year-old, randomly selected. There's now a whole thing to challenge the government to step into it. Third very quick example, another young person who's a total freaking genius. This is a woman called Dominika Lasota, sorry, forgive me, who I was with her and her team, who are called Wschód, which means sunrise in Polish. A couple of weeks ago, on the weekend of the Polish presidential election, which saw far-right candidate elected, which is going to mean Polish politics is all sorts of trouble at that perpetrator-rescuer level. So these guys want to change the way they're working. Instead, they're going to crowdsource what they're calling the Plan for Generations. They're going to work with the whole country to go, what do we actually want? None of the questions that we want discussed are being discussed up there. We're going to go from being victims of this to being creators of what we want. And we invite you to come with us. And it's going to be huge, like I promise you. Plan na pokolenie means Plan for Generations. Final, very quick crescendo to this. I want to tell you about my favourite humans right now. These two, this is Gavin and Heather. They're in a village in the French Alps, and they have started the story. They had an independent outdoor retailer in that village, and they were frustrated at what they could do as they were seeing the climate get worse and so on and so forth. They shifted their business model to be repair rather than sale. So you see réparation, so the pricing down there is for repairs. They started to become a kind of community hub because people were coming in and they realized people were talking to each other and meeting each other and not just purchasing. They said, and this is the inside of the shop, by the way, around that time, Gav got in touch with me and said, like, we read your book, we love it, kind of, what do you do from here? And I glibly said, put up the bat signal, like, see who else wants to do stuff like this, where you are around the world. And he was one of the weird people who've taken me seriously. Those guys put up the bat signal in their local area. They found that there was a disused retail space on the edge of town. You can see that the branding has dropped out of the sign on there. And they managed to, with a whole group of organisations and community folks in the community, take this over, turn it into a second-hand furniture store, a community cafe. They've got 3D printing in there, all of this stuff. Start to build an energy space. They held a festival so this place became called Antropia. They held a festival every year now with a massive party in that space. The colour and the energy compared to what it was, right? Inhabiting the dead space of consumerism with the joy of citizenship. And then they put up the bat signal globally. They started to said, anyone else want to do the sort of stuff we're doing? So far, I think there's 90 odd organisations called the Reaction Collective now. It's growing rapidly. And they've even started a storytelling project called actionism rather than activism, about this idea of citizens stepping into their own agency, doing rather than just pointing the power at the perpetrator, as it were. There's a film called Actionism, a young woman called Ellie Meredith, who's 20 years old, and following her journey that you can screen in communities all over the world and is happening. And the crescendo of this is going to be a campaign they've done a couple of times already on Black Friday. They've started to experiment with and develop a campaign that says let's not do Black Friday, let's do Citizen Friday. Don't clap that. Clap this. The call to action of this campaign is share, repair, and get out in the fresh air. Clap that. And all of that I just offer to you as a way of saying we are in a super serious moment, right? And these guys spoke to it so beautifully. And it requires us to really stare at ourselves. It's not just about telling slightly, incrementally better stories. It's about really challenging ourselves. What does it mean to be prepared ourselves to lead that change? No, everyone is guilty, no one's to blame. So what if we're the first to go for therapy, hey? Thanks very much.